At this time, I am going to ask Larry Elder to come to the microphone.
Thank you so much. Please be seated. Mayor, thank you for that. Mayor, I actually went to Dorsey as well. I went to Crenshaw, Washington, Dorsey, and Fairfax. And one of the reasons I'm running for governor is because of that experience. Crenshaw is the school I graduated from. I just checked. Only 2% of children at Crenshaw High School right now are math proficient. 2%. And it's also a Crip school, meaning it's a school where the Crips dominate. Who sends their kid to a school where only 2% of the kids are math proficient and a gang called the Crips dominate the school if that parent has an option? One of the many, many things I intend to do when I get to Sacramento is champion the issue of school choice. The money should follow the child rather than the other way around. We're spending almost $15,000 per student in California. That's the 19th highest in the nation, and our test scores are near the bottom. 75% of black boys cannot read at state levels of proficiency, and those levels are not high. They lower them all the time. The math scores are even worse. Half of third graders here in California, educated K through 12, cannot read at state levels of proficiency. And again, the math scores are even worse. 80% of the children educated in our government schools, I prefer the term government schools rather than public school, government schools, 80% of them are black and brown. I only mention that because the left prides itself on caring about black and brown students. Yet they're getting a lousy, lousy education. Right. What is the first step towards leaving poverty? To finish high school. Right. One presumably where you can read, write, and compute at grade level. It's astonishing. Roughly 10% of American families have their own kids in private schools. 6% of black American families do. 44% of Philadelphia public school teachers with school-age kids have their own kids in private school. In Chicago, 39% of public school teachers with school-age kids put their own kids in private school. In Los Angeles, where I am, in the district, a family with a public school teacher in it is twice as likely to have his or her own children in private school compared to families that do not have public school teachers in them. It's an outrage. It's an absolute outrage. Now, I mentioned I went to 4 schools. Washington was the first school that I attended because it was the closest. And then Crenshaw was just built. And it was a brand new school. We walked into it. And I thought I was a world beater. I made A's in almost everything that I did. I didn't have to work that hard. Sign my name, show up in class, say a few things, I got an A. I thought I was a genius. And I had exhausted all of the Spanish that my school had, and there was a program called APEX, which stood for Area Program Enrichment Exchange. And there was a consortium of around 8 or 10 high schools that belonged to this consortium, and you could find a high school that had an advanced course that you were interested in that your school didn't have. And Fairfax High had an advanced course in Spanish. So I was bused for 1 semester to Fairfax. The first day I walked into the class, these kids were fluent, Mayor. I mean fluent. I didn't think you could learn to speak a language fluently in a classroom setting. I thought that was impossible. I thought you could learn some grammars, some verbs, conjugation, and then maybe if you were in Mexico or maybe if you were in Spain, you could get it after a period of time. These kids were fluent. The teacher would not allow anybody to speak any language other than Spanish. If you had to use the restroom and you couldn't say, I need to go to the restroom in Spanish, you didn't go to the restroom. And this was the kind of expectation that they had from K through 12. It wasn't that they were brighter, it's that they had far more demanding expectations placed on them by their parents and by their teachers. I didn't have that in my school. And for the first day, I came home and I was crying. And I told my mother, I felt that I'd gotten ripped off. I thought that I was brilliant. I thought I was a genius. Now I realized I was just better than these kids here because they didn't have the same kind of demands that I had in my household, which were not nearly the same demands that these kids had in their household. By the way, they were predominantly Jewish. I know that because during Yom Kippur, you could come to class or not, and there were only 2 people who came, myself and a black janitor. And so I told my mother what happened that day, and my mother started crying. And she said, Larry, I know I should have had you in a better school. I know we should have put you in a better school. We didn't have the money. Maybe someday you can grow up and do something about it. Well, that someday is here.
Yeah.
Now, there are lots of reasons that I'm running for office, and we can go over them real quickly because I want to talk about something that Bishop and I talked about when we first met, because I think it's really, frankly, far more important. I'm running because crime has gone up. Crime has gone up in San Francisco, it's gone up in LA, it's gone up in San Diego, it's gone up in Oakland, for many reasons, and most notably, under this governor, he has released early 20,000 convicted felons, many of whom were violent offenders, and based upon statistics, they're likely to reoffend. What could possibly go wrong? Just the other day, Barbara Boxer got mugged in Oakland, her cell phone was taken, and a few months before that, we're not cheering for Barbara Boxer being mugged, are we? This crowd is brutal. Bishop.
And in church.
And in church. Just a few months earlier, a mentally ill homeless man attacked Gavin Newsom. And had Gavin Newsom not had his security detail with him, who knows what would have happened to him? How many of us can travel around with a security detail? We have two soft on crime DAs. One is in San Francisco, one is in LA, and Gavin Newsom's fingerprints are on both of them. The one in LA is named George Gascon. He was initially given his job as the police chief by then mayor of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, who then supported him for DA, who then supported him here in LA for DA. He believes in cashless bail. You commit a crime, you're arrested, given a court date, and if you don't show up, there's no consequence. As a result, they don't show up. We have passed a proposition called Proposition 47 with the best of intentions. People voted for it because they felt that people who steal are primarily doing so to support their drug habit, which is true. And that, as a result, people need to be treated rather than to go to prison. The problem, I spoke with Sheriff Alex Villanueva of LA County about this, the problem is that without the fear, without the threat of going to jail, there's no incentive for them to be treated. So they're stealing and doing drugs, and absolutely not going into rehab without any fear of going to jail. It's absolutely ridiculous, and one of the many things I'm going to be championing when I get to Sacramento is a repeal of Proposition 47. There's also this dangerous narrative that's been pushed by the left, not just in California, but all over the nation, that police officers are engaging in systemic racism. No one is saying that there aren't bad cops. No one is saying that there aren't cops that do bad things, probably 1%. Just as there are bad talk show hosts, or bad doctors, or bad lawyers. But by crying out loud, the studies show, decade after decade after decade of research has shown, the police, if anything, are more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. In fact, more unarmed whites are killed every year than unarmed blacks. The police kill twice as many white people as they kill black people. It is rare for anybody to be killed by a cop. Roughly 1,000 people out of 350 million people. Almost all are resisting arrest violently with a firearm. It is even rarer for an unarmed black person to be killed. And unarmed does not necessarily mean not dangerous. Michael Brown was unarmed. His DNA was found on the officer's gun. He was trying to get his gun. It is extremely rare. You're almost as likely to be killed by lightning as to be an unarmed black man killed by the police. It is extremely rare. It is a lie. And that lie has two consequences, and they're profound. The first is called the Ferguson effect, or now the George Floyd effect. Much of police work, I would say most of it, is discretionary. You can just respond to radio calls if you want. You're still going to get paid. Or you can cruise around and see something that looks suspicious and get out and try to prevent something before it happens. The latter is not happening anymore. Arrests are down. Traffic stops are down. As a result, crime has gone up.
That's right.
When you reduce the possibility of a bad guy being caught, being convicted, and being incarcerated, crime is going to go up. And the victims, overwhelmingly in the inner city, are black and brown and Asian American people, the people of the left claims they care about. Here's the other thing that happens. You're a young black man, and you've been told by your so-called leaders, whether it's Barack Obama, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's Al Sharpton, whether it's CNN, that the cops aren't there to protect and serve. They're there to harm you. Yeah. When you're pulled over, why in the world should you comply? These are bad guys. My father told me when you are pulled over by the police, make sure your left hand is at 10 o'clock, make sure your right hand is at 2 o'clock. Say yes, ma'am. Say no, ma'am. Say yes, sir. Say no, sir. Make sure your paperwork is in order. And if you feel as if you're mistreated, get a badge number and let's deal with it while you're alive. All too often, this isn't happening. Think about just about every one of these high-profile shootings or killings. Michael Brown would have been avoided had he complied. Jacob Blake, the one who got shot in the back and now in the wheelchair, wouldn't have happened had he complied. Yep. Freddie Gray, the one in the police van, had he been cooperated, he wouldn't have been in the van. We could go down this list. Eric Gardner, the one who was selling Lucy's in New York. If he had cooperated, they wouldn't have had to surround him. Virtually every single one of these things would have been avoided had they simply complied. Yep. But their so-called leaders are telling them to resist, and as a result, an ordinary stop is now escalating into something far more dangerous.
That's true.
You're causing this. Your rhetoric is causing this. One of the many things I'm going to do with my bully pulpit as governor is I'm going to change that narrative. I'm going to tell people what I just now told you, and a lot of people have never heard this.
That's right.
Yeah. That's very
I'm running because of the outrageous rise in the number of people who are sleeping on our streets, pitching tents on the sides of freeways, and again, there are lots of reasons for this.
Yes, sir.
But one of the things that we cannot do is incentivize more of that kind of behavior. And what the government has done, what Gavin Newsom has done, has pursued a policy called housing first. That is building housing far more expensively than would be the case if the private sector did it, by the way, without dealing with the underlying reason why people are on the streets in the first place. Some percentage of them, nobody really knows what percentage, 5%, 15%, 10%, nobody really knows, are schizophrenic.
Yes.
And by that I mean a danger to themselves or to others. They need to be removed from the street for their own protection and for the protection of the rest of the homeless population, and they need to be treated and housed. But the bulk of them are mentally ill or they're addicted to substance, whether it's meth, whether it's heroin. They need to be treated.
Yes.
And government has proven itself to be ineffective in doing that.
Right.
But you know who is effective at doing it? Churches.
Yep. Amen.
Mosques. Synagogues. And once they're treated, they have to go somewhere. And given the fact that the price of a home in California, the average price has just hit $800,000, which is anywhere between 150% more than the national average or 250% more than the national average, depending upon which study you're talking about. We have no low-cost housing, no low-cost apartments. One of the many things I'm going to do when I become governor is to declare a statewide emergency on housing so I can unleash these hundreds of thousands of units all ready to go that are being held up for fear of lawsuits under the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA. That's going to be waived. That's going to be suspended. Also, I had a long conversation with the former HUD Secretary, Dr. Ben Carson. I said, Dr. Carson, what was your plan for the homeless? He said, we had this all worked out at the end of the previous administration. I negotiated a deal with the mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, who's a Democrat. We have large areas of federally owned land here in California that would not be subject to CEQA, that would not be subject to the rules and policies that jack up the price of a home here in California. We can build low-cost housing for a fraction of what is being built. And when people are treated, they can go there. I asked for a copy of his policy. He sent it to me. It's eminently workable. It's not going to happen overnight, but this problem can be solved. And I want to point out that my opponent, Gavin Newsom, when he ran for mayor of San Francisco in 2004, he said, in 10 years, I'm going to solve the homeless problem in my city. That was 2014. It is worse.
Yes.
And then when he became lieutenant governor, he pounded the table and complained, quote, I have nothing to do, close quote. How about fulfilling the campaign promise you made to people of your city in 2004, Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
I'm running, as I said, because for the first time in California's history, we're 170 years old, people are leaving.
Yep.
Middle-class people are leaving. People making between 50 and 100K are leaving. The number one reason they cite, they can't afford a house.
Yep.
There's a magazine called CEO Magazine. It's been around 17 years. For 17 years, they've asked CEOs of companies all around America, what's the best state in which to do business? What's the worst? Based upon taxes, based upon regulations, based upon the power of the public sector unions, based upon the quality of schools, based upon crime. based upon whether or not there's a business-friendly or business anti-friendly atmosphere. For 17 consecutive years, California has been named the worst state in which to do business.
Yes.
And for the first 6 months of 2021, the rate at which businesses are leaving California is twice the rate at which they've left the last 3 years. They cite cost of living, they cite taxes, they cite regulation. That's got to be turned around.
Yes.
And the way this man shut down this state, ignoring science, having his own children enjoying in-person private education, sitting up there at the French Laundry restaurant with the very people that drafted the mandates that they were violating by not wearing masks and by not engaging in social distancing. It's absolutely outrageous. Nearly a third of all small businesses here in California are now gone forever.
Yeah. That's true.
Many of them owned by the black and brown and Asian American people that the left prides itself on caring about. Let me give you an idea of the arrogance. I ran a small business. One of the things I bring to the table is that I am a businessman. And I had a business in Cleveland for 14 years. It didn't go bankrupt. I didn't liquidate it. I sold it. And it kept going on for years and years and years. My point is, I know how difficult it is to run a business. I know how difficult it is to run a profitable business. I know how difficult it is to meet a payroll every 2 weeks. Many of these people sitting in Sacramento have never run a hot dog stand, and they're telling you and me what to do.
Yes.
I got this story from several people. I wasn't there, but people have told me this. 3 or 4 people did, and the story was always the same, so I'm assuming it's true. Some years ago, Mayor Garcetti of Los Angeles was debating whether or not to sign a minimum wage hike to $12. Right now it's $15. So he invited 30 or 40 business people into his office to discuss this. And I was told by 3 or 4 different people, everybody came in and brought their profit and loss statement with them. These are all small business people. And they told him, our profit margins are thin. The number one cost of running any business is labor. You're artificially increasing my cost of labor. I'm going to have to do a few things. Defer hiring somebody I was going to hire. Cut somebody's hours. Raise prices, all of which have negative consequences. Please don't do this. Nobody disagreed with that. The mayor stood up, buttoned his jacket, and he said, I believe you can absorb the cost and sign the increase. The man has never run a lemonade stand. By the way, he went to the London School of Economics. Didn't study economics. He studied ethnic studies. But you think just by walking around might learn something through osmosis? This is the kind of arrogance I'm talking about. There's somebody, when you run a business and you work 9 to 5, there's a word for that. It's called bankrupt.
Yes.
Anybody who runs a business 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and this man stands up, buttons his jacket, and says, I believe you can absorb the cost. This is the kind of attitude that we have in Sacramento, the attitude from the left, and it's offensive to me.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Now, there are other things, of course, going on here. We have the rolling brownouts because we haven't adequately invested in our energy grid. I'm not a climate change denier, as I've been called in one of the Gavin Newsom ads. I'm a climate change alarmism denier. And I don't think it's very smart. I don't think it's very smart to force our utility companies to spend billions and billions of dollars for so-called renewables, which are weather dependent, wind and solar, and underinvesting in things like oil. And there's been a war on nuclear power. We love Japan. We love France. You know where they get the bulk of their energy? Nuclear. We have one nuclear power plant left. It's called Diablo. It's going to be shut down in a year or 2. We just shut down San Onofre. We used to get between 8 and 10% of our energy from nuclear. Now we're getting less and less from it. The fires have been mismanaged. There's a reason why these fires have become so much more intense. It's because there's been a war on the logging industry. The logging industry is about half what it used to be, and as a result, trees have grown so thick, and when they do fall, there's nobody there to clear them. Outgoing Governor Jerry Brown had a plan to clear 500,000 acres of fallen trees and dry vegetation. 500,000. Gavin Newsom bragged he cleared 90,000. Had he done so, it still would have been a drop in the bucket, but it turns out he'd only done about 13% of what he said. So he misled everybody by a factor of 7. We don't have enough money to do this. We have enough money for a bullet train that goes from nowhere to nowhere. $100 million. This is madness. Finally, water. We are running out of water in California. I was lucky enough to have my 21st birthday in Jerusalem, the Eternal City. Israel is a desert state.
Yeah.
Guess what desert state is now water self-sufficient?
Yes.
Israel. Because of desalination plants. They have a little body of water next to it called the Mediterranean. We have a little body of water next to us called the Pacific Ocean. We can't figure this out?
Yes.
So crime is up. The cost of living is outrageous. People are leaving for the first time. Business people are leaving for the first time.
Yes.
Very wealthy people are leaving for the first time. Now, a lot of people don't care when very wealthy people leave for the first time. I'll tell you something. We have the highest top marginal tax rate in the country, 13.3%. Every dollar anybody makes above $300,000, 13.3% is taken away just in state taxes. I'm not even talking about federal taxes or sales taxes or property taxes. You add it all up. It's not uncommon for somebody in that tax bracket to be paying 62% of his or her income. And puts us at a competitive disadvantage against Tennessee, against Florida, against Texas. The number one revenue stream here in California are the state income taxes. 1% of families in California, 1% of households in California pay 50% of the state income taxes. So when you pick up the paper and you read some billionaire has just left and you shrug your shoulders, 1% of taxpayers in California pay half of the state income tax, and that's the largest source of revenue. So when my father used to tell me this, Larry, I never got a job from a poor person.
Nope.
So for all those reasons, I'm running. For all those reasons, we need a change in Sacramento. But I do want to say this, and this is what Bishop and I were talking about before I got started. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson launched what he called the War on Poverty. At the time, 25% of black children entered the world without a father married to the mother. 8% of white kids entered the world without a father married to the mother. War on Poverty, 1965, we spent almost $20 trillion now on the so-called war on poverty. Right now, 70% of black children enter the world without a father married to the mother. 25% of white kids enter the world without a father married to the mother. Half of Hispanic kids enter the world without a father married to the mother. 40% of all American kids enter the world without a father married to the mother. And forget about elder. I always like to quote left-wing people whenever I can. Barack Obama said a child raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. What we've done, in my humble opinion, what the left has done, is they've incentivized women to marry the government, and they've allowed men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And so many of these problems we're talking about, whether it's crime, whether it's poor schools, the genesis is a breakdown of the family. Look at homelessness. California, 6.5% black population. 40% of the homeless are black. California, 15% Asian American population. 2% of the homeless are Asian American because of strong family ties.
That's right.
You break down the family, you have all sorts of unintended bad consequences. The genesis is a breakdown of the family, and we need to have a discussion about that, and we're not.
Yes.
That said, it is not a death sentence to be raised without a father. My father never knew his father. My name, Elder, is not the name of his biological father. My dad never met his biological father. My father was an only child. He had a mother who could neither read nor write. My father doesn't even know what his birth date is. He knows the year, he doesn't know the date. He told me when he enrolled into kindergarten, the teacher asked him what his birth date was, and my father said, I don't know, I just know the year. So she wrote down May 25, which was her birth date. So every time May 25 went around, I told my dad, we have a 1 in 365 shot of this being right. My father said his mother was irresponsible, never worked, lived on a series of men, each one more irresponsible than the other. Elder was the name of some man who was in his life the longest. He was in his life for about 4 or 5 years. My dad said he came home at the age of 13, and he started quarreling with his mom's then boyfriend. The mom sided with the boyfriend. threw my father out of the house, never to return. Black boy, Jim Crow South, Athens, Georgia, at the beginning of the Great Depression. Lots of people in this room have had troubles. I defy very many people in this room to know somebody who had a hand of cards dealt like that. I said, Dad, what did you do? My dad said, I walked down the dirt road, I picked up trash for families, I cleaned out the barn, ultimately I shined shoes in the city, got me a job as a hotel valet. Pearl Harbor, my dad joined the Marines. I said, Dad, why the Marines? 2 reasons. They go where the action is. I love those uniforms. My dad was stationed on the island of Guam, World War II. He was in charge of cooking for the colored soldiers. My dad can look at a cake and tell you what's in it. He's that good. War is over. He goes back to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he married my mom to get him a job as a short order cook. And Bishop, forgive my language. My dad walked around for 2 or 3 days to get him a job as a cook, and he was told, we don't hire niggers. My dad went to the unemployment office. Lady says, you went through the wrong door. My dad goes out to the hall, sees colored only, goes to that door to the very same lady who sent him out. She's wanted him to know what the rules were. My dad said, this is BS. I'm coming to Los Angeles, where I was on a run before the war. People seem to be friendly, and I'm gonna get me a job as a cook. My dad comes out to LA, walks around, and they said, you don't have any references. I need references. Where are your references? My dad said, I need references to make ham and eggs. Goes to the unemployment office, one door. My dad said to the lady, she said, I have nothing for you. My dad said, what time do you open? She says, 9 o'clock. What time do you close? She said, 5. My dad said, I'll be sitting in that chair from 9 to 5 till you find something. Sat there for a whole day. She had nothing, came back the next day. Around 1 or 2 o'clock, she calls him up. I have something. I don't know whether or not you're going to want it. My dad said, of course I'm going to want it. I'm starting a family. What is it? She said, it's a job cleaning toilets for Nabisco brand bread. My dad did that for 10 years, took a second full-time job, cleaning toilets at another bread company called Barbara Ann Bread, cooked for a family on the weekends, and then went to night school 2 or 3 nights a week to get his GED. The man never slept, which is why he was so grouchy all the time, why my brothers and I disliked him so much. My dad and I had an 8-hour conversation when I was 25 years old, when he told me all of this. And as my dad is speaking, my father got bigger and bigger and bigger. And because of how much I disliked him early on, I got smaller and smaller and smaller. And now at the end of this 8-hour conversation, I'm crying. I was 25 years old. I hadn't talked to my dad in almost 10 years. Not that he abandoned the family or anything. I was just mad at him. I thought he was mean. And at the end of this conversation, I'm crying. And I said, Dad, please forgive me for judging you so harshly. And my dad said, don't worry about it, Larry. You just didn't know. And this is the whole point behind the story. My dad said, just follow the advice I've always given you and your brothers. Hard work wins.
Yes.
You get out of life what you put into it, Larry. You cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you complain about what somebody said to you or did to you, go to the nearest mirror, look at it, and say to yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome? And finally, my father told my brothers and me this: no matter how hard you work, how good you are, sooner or later, bad things are going to happen. How you deal with those bad things will tell your mother and me if we raised a man.
Yes.
And I didn't want to get too political, but there is sort of a political message to this story, too. My dad was a lifelong Republican. He was the only black Republican I knew until I got into law school. I didn't know any other black Republican, just my dad.
Wow.
And in those days, you know, when there would be an election, you'd have a booth for the Republicans and a booth for the Democrats. And in our neighborhood, there'd be one booth and then 15 booths for everybody else, because there were no Republicans except for my dad. And so it's like, oh, my dad's honorary booth. He'd walk in there. Everybody knew he was a Republican. He didn't care. And my dad said this about Democrats. Democrats want to give you something for nothing.
Yes.
And when you try and get something for nothing, you almost always end up getting nothing for something.
Yes, that's true.
And finally, I want to just say this about my mom, because my mom certainly would not be happy if I didn't give her some love too. Because I was raised by two hardworking, loving parents. I didn't appreciate the fact that I had such a strong foundation, of course, until I got older. You never appreciate your parents when you're younger. It's when you get older that you learn to appreciate them. I was so fortunate. We were all fortunate to have been born in America. We also hit the lottery if we had two good, hardworking parents like I did. My mother told my brothers and me, no one can make you feel inferior without your permission.
Yes.
She was raised on a farm in Huntsville, Alabama. Parents could barely read or write, but they ran a farm. My mother said, no one can make you feel inferior without your permission.
Yes.
And I tell this story that when we were at our other house, I had to be 7 years old, because I remember the steps. We had an illustrated book of presidents, from George Washington to the then incumbent, who was Dwight Eisenhower. We went over every single president there. And after she closed the book, after Eisenhower, she said, Larry, someday you could be in this book if you want to.
Amen.
And I'm going to tell you, I never, ever aspired to go into politics, let alone to become president of the United States, nor am I saying that is my goal at all. I'm just telling you, I believed in my mother, I believed in her optimism, and it made me believe in America.
Amen.
Finally, one day we read a poem in a course called African American Studies. Let me just pause for a second before I say this. I know we have a lot of people here from the Asian American community, and I appreciate it. I want to tell you a quick story. When I was in elementary school and middle school, I would say 10% or so of the kids were Asian American. And they were my friends. I was closer to the Asian American kids than I were to most of the black kids, with a couple of exceptions, because we were nerds, we were eggheads. We didn't use that word in those days. It was I think studious was the word that we used. It wasn't pejorative, and now it's pejorative, but we didn't see that way. And one of my friends was William Moy. By the way, I've never run for office before, except I ran against William Moy for class president in 5th grade. I beat him. And William Moy and Catherine Kumamoto and Paige Morishige all told me the same thing. When they got a B on an exam, their parents told them they didn't try hard enough. When they got an A on an exam, their parents told them the exam was too easy. My parents were very demanding, but not demanding like that, nor were any of the black kids' parents like that. It was night and day, and I saw the difference. It's one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier 15% of the population in California, Asian American, but only 2% are homeless. Family, hard work, tradition, culture, studious, academic oriented. These are wonderful qualities, and we can learn. We all should be learning from this. So, back to my mom. We read a course in African American literature. And by the way, those of you who've followed my radio career have never heard me use the term African American. I don't. Only when I'm quoting somebody else. I'm an American who's black. All of this hyphen stuff, I've never been down with it. We all could hyphen if we want to. We're all Americans.
Yes.
But that was the name of the course. And in the course, we read a poem by a man named County Cullen. It goes like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now, I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. But he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. The teacher, who was black, was angry. She talked about how this was going to permanently stain his psyche. He'll always think of himself as a second-class citizen and never feel fully integrated into America. The class was angry. I was angry. So as I was coming home from school, I knew my mother was going to have a different reaction to the poem. I didn't know what it would be, but I wanted to find out what it was. So I walked into the house. My mother was in the kitchen stirring a big pot of greens, I'll never forget it, and frying chicken wings, my favorite. And I said, Mom, we read a poem in class, and I want to get your reaction to it. She said, yeah, go ahead, what is it? So I read it to her. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep looking straight at me. Now, I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all things that happened there, that's all that I remember. My mom took the spoon out of the pot, hid it on the side, and said, Larry, what a darn shame he let something like that spoil his vacation. How many wings do you want? Bishop, thank you so much for having me. Very important that we vote. Please vote yes on the recall. Get 10 of your friends to vote yes on the recall, and vote now, and my website is electelder.com. Throw a little something in the tip jar because my opponent can raise an unlimited amount of money. He's always raised about $50 million from the usual suspects, the teachers union, the public sector unions, Hollywood, big tech. I'm going to be outspent almost 10 to 1, so to make it a fair fight, go to electelder.com. And again, unless 50% plus 1 votes to recall him, doesn't matter what happens on the other side. I'm way, way ahead on the other side. I'm not worried about that. I want to remind people of the things I said about how he shut down the government, how people are leaving, the crime, the poor quality of our public education, the obnoxious and arrogant way he imposed mandates and didn't follow them themselves, his poor management of water, his poor management of the forest fires. These are all reasons. You can just pick one. I mean, this man does not deserve to have another 2 years, let alone another 4 years in the event that he survives a recall. So thank you all for having me. May God bless you.